quite an intro.
I
Thank
mean, thanks for coming and hanging and giving us your insight. I can pre-start this with saying working with Matt is so much fun. Like, it gives me life as a producer. From the start to the middle to the finish, it's always clear. He knows what to fight for. He knows what not to fight for. So I would love to unpack how you approach that and how you found those tools.
Good questions. I mean, biggest thing I would say is I want this just to be super organic conversation. There's so many different ways when I was thinking about what to talk about with this as a director and like the practical sides of filmmaking and like where your tools come from. But I think the thing that like really jumped out to me is I've had a couple friends over the past year and a half that we've talked a lot about the idea of like excellence and growth and the intentionality required with that. And like the metaphor that we really kind of landed on was the idea of training like an athlete. So that's something for me that I've put a lot of brain power behind the past year and a half plus. And just in terms of like a practical example of what that means to approach your craft in the way, like I grew up a huge Kobe fan. And so like he would talk infamously about his work ethic and what that looked like to be in a gym 24/7. And we as the audience saw like 1% of that.
Yeah.
And he wasn't afraid to take those shots because he had said, he's like, I've taken like 10,000 of them and I've missed a ton of them and I've made a ton of them, right? So it's just, I started to think a lot about that idea of like, oh, how do I bring that approach to what I do so that when I show up on set, that's the 1% of the time.
I love it. And then I guess we'll start with also, this is a montage of just showing you glimpses of Matt's geniusness, and then we'll kind of, approach that and break it down of what does that mean in film, right? I think for a lot of us, especially from a director, they're the first one who takes, my job, numbers, right? And then he's like, well, let's make those numbers into this. And for him, I think what my experience from him is his mindset from the start. It is something where he takes a piece of paper from an agency and he's able to make it into something else. So let's dive into the montage and then we'll go into more deeper showcasing his work.
Yeah, I mean, here it is. It's playing. It's got a little track behind it. The reality is it just pulls from what I feel like are some of my favorite pieces.
Yep.
Like this is a doc piece, and those are two of the loveliest humans I've ever met. Like this is a spot that was a super small piece. I think we will talk about at some point in time about a father and daughter. This was a Gear 7 piece with P&G. That was a ton of fun. This was a passion project that I wrote and directed with Gear 7 and Kirk back in the day. So it's just like, it's a mixture to me, and I wanted to pull stuff like this. It was a ton of fun with you guys out in Arizona.
Yep.
It's a mixture of all things that were like brand and commercial and things I was just passionate about. Alex Lake worked with me on that. He's in this room.
How'd you get the horses to run?
Great story. Very great story. We had a wrangler on set for sure. Thank you for putting that together, by the way.
Yes. Shout out Lindsay.
You picked like a really vibey track, which is great because I feel like all I really care about in my pieces is like emotion.
Yeah. So. He talks about music before we even get it awarded.
Yeah, that's true. That's fair.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of like jumped off like topic-wise what I feel like I wanted to talk about, and I shared like the Kobe thing. I think that was a big thing for me as a kid. I grew up here, so like I have a strong sports connection growing up in the South. But the Kobe one was cool because I would like watch him over the course of 10, 15 years. And he went through some crazy stuff in his life, and like I watched the way he changed and grew. And I remember when he retired, it was just like, it kind of hit me in a really unique way. Because I don't have like a ton of like idol figures or whatever, but he was someone that I remember as a kid like falling in love with watching. And I think the biggest thing I learned from that was the totality of something, of how that was a work ethic of someone showing up every single day. Yep. And I watched him miss a lot of shots, including ones that would have won a game. And yet you remember like these really iconic moments where someone did win a game, and there's these like incredible photos from those moments. But I think just that totality was something that even before this idea had set in for me, it struck me in that moment because I saw what hard work really meant. Yep. And his big thing, and I think this is like the core of probably what I would say, is he always talked about he was willing to do all that for the love of the game. Like, all about passion. His whole like short film that won the Oscar was like his poem that he wrote about retirement, and it was all about loving basketball that much that he's willing to give himself to it. So when I started to dive deeper into this topic, it really came down to that, which is like, if you really love something, then it's not hard to give yourself over to it. The hard part is just the disciplining of yourself and the mindset and what that really means to like push yourself to another level. But again, the underneath side of that, if you love it, it's like you're very willing to put in that work.
Yeah, and well, talk to us, like, when it comes to training like an athlete, how does that apply to, you know, the pitching phase and then to the pre-production? Like, how do you practice what you play?
Yeah, it is that. I think that's why I liked the athlete thing, was the idea that how you practice is how you play. So like, I would say even before the pitch, for me, it was starting in just my like actual life habits of like, it's so easy to be like, oh, I'm going to put all this stuff into being a filmmaker, and I'm going to let other pieces of my life suffer. It's like, no, I need to take care of myself.
Yes.
I need to get sleep. I need to have like diligence and focus in the little things and like my mindset. And even like exercising and all those sort of habits, the more emphasis I put in like routine I was able to create with that, I think then the more that those things weren't variables, those were things I did every day and I expected out of myself. And I think then at that point in time, you're able to take that mindset and apply it to something like the pitch process or the pre-production process. Prep is like everything on a shoot. Like, that's what I learned at some point in time. The difference between a really good shoot and a really great shoot was how much time did you spend prepping that and inspire other people to start prepping that.
Yes, I mean, we learned that yesterday.
Yes.
Yeah. And then even more so too, I think the industry can be grueling, specifically for the director. You know, the amount of feedback, fast turnarounds, you know, mind dump. We need all of this from you, and then we need you to sell it on a Zoom, and like, and then on the day we need you to bring out the humility in a 60-year-old and an 80-year-old. You know, how do you balance that as a leader when it comes to training like an athlete, but then knowing when you can depend on your team, and you can say, you know, you run this department, and I want you to bring your stuff to the table.
Yeah, it's a really good question.
No pressure.
Yeah, right. That's literally what you just said. Like, you're on a call with an agency and they're like, cool, like, we're going to walk you through these boards. And now tell us this amazing vision that you've had for 37 seconds right now. Like the ability to take time and like actually like digest something and think on it. I think that's a big part of the process. It's really about like giving yourself over to that process. Mm-hmm. So maybe like that's where like the train like an athlete thing, there's the mindset slide with
the orb.
Circle.
You were correct. There is an orb.
There's an orb there. I don't know why.
Yep.
But I'll say that in the sense that there's so much to me to be said about the idea of like fully giving yourself over and to that side of effort and that kind of work because of what you're passionate about. Mm-hmm. That it starts super early. It starts before the pitch. It starts prepping before the agency call and like spending time with whatever deck they sent you or whatever it is that you're working on, so that you actually can engage with it. You have thought about it. You can engage with them and ask them questions about it. And that to me is like, you have to do that every step of the way. Yep. It's just about putting in that time and not phoning something in, right? Like the job that we were just working on. Casting is like a huge part of this process. We all know that.
Yes.
Like a great actor is going to make or break a piece. It's easy to go through the motions, I feel like, on certain things. And that's a challenge to myself with this whole, like, an example of how you push yourself like an athlete. You can't go through the motions because you know what the result is going to be. If you've done that before, you can kind of learn from those mistakes. So like in this one, it was like, no, I need to really guide the agency and the brand through the casting process because it's easy for them. It's not their job. They're going to just look at pretty faces on a page. And they can make those decisions of like, oh, I like this person and they look really good together and they look like a family.
Yep.
I'm the one at some point in time who has to go, what's their past work? And what are they doing in their audition? And how did did they take direction? Like, so part of that is again, just giving yourself over and being willing to put in that time. Because if you don't do it, no one else is going to do it.
Yep. Well, and something that like I beyond applaud you on is not only do you do the work, but you also find the time to make all parties, whether that be the agency and client or straight to client, feel like they're a part of that thought. And you always give the time to explain, here's why. I know why you're probably leaning this way, but on the day, you're gonna really want to be able to get notes and direction. And this prime example was we had a 2-day shoot, and the agency loved the 3 options, and they were okay, right? Like, they were great. But this was a huge piece for our lead dad. He was the make or break. He had to have depth, flow, be able to take notes, and Matt spent hours going through all these auditions, and none of the options that he wanted were on the agency selects. So instead of it just being, that director who's like, no, it's like, let's set up a call. Let's go through this together. And when Matt's able to like speak to it and guide, it always ends with, oh, well, okay. I mean, we're going that way. And then they even came up to me all during Video Village where they were like, thank you so much to Matt for fighting for this. Like, he is perfect. So we were able to get, an amazing spot because of the intentionality of pausing the process. Because in production, it's super easy for everyone to be deadline. Like, we just need approvals. We need wardrobe moving. We need art going. And it's like, but if we move too quickly on that, we could do all the prep and we show up to something that we can't fix, So you definitely know, my experience with you is when to say pause and when to go, here we go.
and I would say too, that's come from the mistakes that you make along the way. Like, I've been doing this for long enough now, and I've seen like the progression of things to go, okay, how did I find myself in this situation? And how do I not allow that to happen to again? And I think that's like, the mindset idea, the train like an athlete thing, a big part of that conversation with friends has been accountability. Yep. And accountability with yourself. So like one of the things that I have written that I look at every day is like, look at yourself in the mirror. Like, truly, like, ask yourself, okay, am I willing to do what it takes with whatever it is that I'm working on that day?
Yep.
Because I think there's just human nature to some degree is like, how can I get this done without giving the most maximum amount of effort? Yeah. And at some point in time, you have to just take it to heart and understand inside, like, I'm not going to accomplish this the way I want to if I'm not giving maximum effort. And I think that was a big part of that for me, was like seeing pieces that I was working on that I liked, and then seeing other pieces out in the world that I was just blown away by. It's the whole Ira Glass thing where he talks about taste. Like, you start here and your taste is you have great taste, but you don't know how to get your work to that taste. To me, it's about effort. Yep. That is how you get your taste and that work that you love so much to marry together. So yeah, I think the vulnerability and the humility of like, if you put in that effort or not. Like, I knew going through the casting process on that job, I knew if I was going to bed that night, if I had actually put in the work, and because I knew when that deadline was coming. Mm-hmm. And so you have to be able to be honest with yourself and go, yeah, it's going to take extra work for me to do this, but like, I believe that it's worth it. Yep. Because I've been in those situations. We worked on a different job together where I felt like I was limited in getting what I wanted to get from the talent on that job. It just, in terms of like the range of what I was looking for, they weren't delivering it. So that was a good learning experience for me to go, okay, how do I apply that phase of the process to make sure I don't end up with that same result again? Yep.
No, I mean, it's amazing. And I think that could also lead us to, showing one of your passion projects, because, with the nature, it's really easy to get burnt out, so finding the time and the space to be like, no, I'm obsessed with what I do. Like, I love it. I would love to show one of your passion projects if able.
For sure.
You ready to go? There are a lot of memories out here.
I'm not touching the wheel, you're driving.
Deep down, I always knew this day would come. I never meant to hold you back. It's just hard to let you go. It's all right. You gotta go your own way. You gotta be your own man. That's what you always taught me. Doesn't make it any easier. First step is always the hardest. But this place, it'll always be with you. Wherever you go.
There's other pieces queued up there. But.
Okay. Well, what I would love is, taking how this all started, training like an athlete, and how that was brought to life from that project. That is huge. It's a lot going on for a passion project, right? So I'm sure that took a lot of headspace, a lot of time. How did you approach that?
I think it started with just the reality of saying, I'm not getting the work that I want to get. And I feel like I'm capable of getting it, but I also understand this whole industry and this process. It doesn't matter if I feel that way. It doesn't matter if they feel that way, they meaning agency, brand, whatever. You have to have something tangible for them to see because they are spending a lot of money on something.
Yep.
So yeah, it started with just an understanding of that. And that's a process that I'd already bought into at that point of doing passion projects and understanding that that's how you stretch yourself. You're going to get to write something that, a brand would never write. And you're going to get to hone in on a niche that you care about versus hey, here's the work you've done. So you're going to keep getting more of that work. So yeah, I was just honest about that. And my EP that I worked with on that, we were just intentional about the strategy process of saying, cool, how do you pour something that you care about into this job? And how do you also check some boxes that commercially are the things that you're missing in your reel?
Yep.
And so I think that was at least the starting point for that.
Love it. And then I guess, to put that much time, because I'm sure there was a lot of car stuff going on, but then you were still able to find the humility. I would love for you to kind of touch on how much that is involved on screen, off screen in your daily life, how you're able to depend, the Julie example yesterday, of how you're able to encourage your teammates at the end of the day. That's what they are.
Yeah. Passion projects are really unique because no one shows up for that unless they are just super excited about it. So
and they like you.
Yeah, it is. It's step one is they have to trust you. They have to believe in the vision. Yep. And I always am intentional to approach someone that I feel like is going to benefit from it as well. I don't want to ask for favors and ask for something for free for just myself. My good buddy John shot this with me, and he shot a bunch of car stuff, but it was more automotive, racetrack stuff. Yep. So I knew he wanted to get into more lifestyle stuff, and he's a huge collaborator. We've worked together a ton. That's a massive piece of the puzzle. Yep. So that was a big thing. It was just trying to approach people, and then at that point, it is about how much time are you willing to put into something? Yep. And people generally seem to rise to the occasion if you're putting in that much time. And yes, on a passion project, it's literally going and flying myself to Utah to scout that, and it's the production world of crazy stories of me having no service out in this place. And the scout order got changed and somehow it didn't get communicated. And next thing I know, I'm on this mountaintop and a sheriff is calling me in Utah. Are you still alive? And meanwhile, my wife is crying at home, and they were looking at flying out to Utah, and the EP was where are you? It was a whole story. So I say that and say we could go into that world of selling stuff. We all know there's crazy stories.
Yes.
But that's that is a reality of being on set. There's always going to be interesting stories and things that you can laugh about after the fact. Yeah. But it's all about that ability to get in and just say, I'm going to get my hands dirty, and I'm going to put in whatever effort it takes to do this, because I just know location scouting is everything in this film. That is a character within that piece. So yeah, for me, it was just every step of the way, keeping my eyes on understanding that I had a story that I was really passionate to tell. That's another part of it, right? It's you mentioned the burnout thing. If you're going to inspire yourself to go create something and you know how much work and effort that's going to take, to me, I think the number one core is the whole, like, I have to be obsessed with what I'm doing.
Yep.
So for me, it was like, oh, what's an interesting thing that I can do and I can lean into in my own life? So I really wanted to write something around that father-son dynamic. I grew up here, right, in the South. So, like, my dad is pretty middle America in that regard, doesn't, like, wear his heart on his sleeve. And so I wanted to, like, start with that as a basis of, like, oh, what does a real connection look like for a father and son? Mm-hmm. And it's messy, and, like, the dad is, like, trying to figure out how to express himself, but maybe that's just not what he's good at. So yep. I had the seed of an idea that I actually had personal interest in. And I also think that's a huge part of it, right? Because then you start to build everything around that. Yep. And it's easier at that point in time to, like, remember why you're inspired to tell that story and put in the countless hours of work that it's going to take to make it great.
I love that. And what I would love to piggyback on that is to go from a passion, but then if we show the next one, you know, how do you bring that same level of passion, the same level of humility, being able to bring it out of actors when it isn't something you wrote, when it isn't something that came from your head from the starting? It's more of a collaboration with agency.
Yeah. Justin, let me know when you have audio.
I've seen that so many times while pitching you. It still gets me every time.
Same. Yeah. I would also say, like, how could you not read that script and be excited about it? Like, yeah. It's a really cool concept. And it was a tiny project. And I often feel like that's kind of how it works. Like, the ones that you really want to do, the ones that are really special, are not the ones that are well-funded and well-supported. And so at that point in time, that's the whole train like an athlete thing, right? Like, the mindset is, why would I say yes to this and not be willing to put in that amount of work, like it was a passion project at that point in time? So, like, yeah, you still need to get paid, you still need to treat it like work, yeah. But the amount of effort it's going to take to make it great, like that's a constant on every piece of work that you're going to do. So regardless of big or small at that point, I think, to me, it's pretty easy to channel the same energy into it, because it's just about understanding on the front end that if I don't put in that kind of effort and that kind of work, I'm not going to be proud of that result. Like, we're not going to be sitting here talking about that piece. And I had every excuse in the world to not talk about that piece, right? It was such a tiny budget. And it was a single day shoot in LA and all the expenses and the things that come with that. But at the end of the day, that's not an excuse. Like, because if you're passionate about it, you can put in that effort and pull in people that want to collaborate with you and who are also going to put in that effort. That's the other thing I would say, right? Is, like, I can only control the variable of how much I'm putting into something, but the people you surround yourself with is a massive part of this. And they are the secret to really elevating this thing. And it's finding people that share in that enthusiasm with you, that are going to go above and beyond on every project. And I think passion projects are a great way of, like, when you build that rapport and relationship, you know that when you hire them for a real job, what they're going to do, because they've already done that with you.
No, I love it. And then I guess the only other thing that I know you and I have talked about it a lot, but is how do you, especially for a piece like that, get everyone, giving space and allow that set to have the actors sink in, have that moment? What's your approach with that?
That one's an interesting one in general because again, like every job has its own like ridiculous story. That one was that incredibly beautiful house was on the market. And when we showed up for the tech scout, there was a sale pending sign in the yard. And so the homeowner was on 11.
I can only imagine.
Don't move, don't touch this, don't do that, don't scratch this. And it was a distraction. Yeah. I distinctly remember the scene where the little girl is like at the funeral. And I remember the homeowner being like 2 rooms over, just like chewing out our gaffer because of like a circuit that had blown or whatever. It's just like stuff. And so I think that being said, you really do have to be able to stay in the moment. So part of that is having a great team that is going to handle that. Yep. And having a producer who's going to go fight for you in the other room and diffuse the situation. And it's just sitting present in the moment and remembering like how key that shot is, how key that moment is, and that performance. So I just sat with that girl and we just talked, and like the grandmother actor was amazing and came in and talked, and we just sat and like tried to create a space for her where she didn't have to worry about that stuff. It could be going on in the other room, but people will feed off of you and like if you're freaking out about it or not. So staying calm in the moment was a big part of that. And so, I think all these projects, the Utah one's another example of that. Like Scott, that actor, the dad is a good friend now, and that's because we spent so many hours talking before that shoot. And when we talked at his audition, like we had a huge conversation at that point, like because I already knew he was great for the role. So I think it's that too. It's that great actors want insight and intention, and they want to know what your vision is, and they want to also have the freedom to go have a sandbox to play in. And so I think it's like if you've connected with that person on like a human level, then you're able to channel that back and set amidst all the craziness and say, hey, remember what we talked about and like what made us excited about this role. I think that just and then controlling the chaos of set to make sure that if it's like a really emotional moment, that everyone around you is aware of those circumstances, and that we're all working towards like creating that space for that actor in that moment.
Amazing. And the last thing that I would love to touch on too is when it comes to you with prep, how much is the camera movement also adding a layer of humility for you? From the moment you get the job, you're already thinking with edit, right? You're already internalizing the music. You're already wanting to talk to your DP and figuring out this is an important push. Again, I feel like that goes back to the training like an athlete, because before we're even talking locations, you're already thinking how the camera is almost another person in that room. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because the commercial side of things too, there's so many trends with like you as a director, you're like, how do I keep up with this? And how do I, like the spot that you and I just did, like there was a temptation to be like, oh, let's move the camera in super dynamic ways. And because, every commercial the past 2 years is like a Taco Bell commercial where the camera's attached to the taco, or whatever. And like,
to the taco.
I think on some level you have to really, again, it goes back to spending time with the material and the intention of it and going, what's right for this story? I literally watched, it was funny, like I saw a friend posting about this last night. I think it's Every Frame of Painting is the YouTube channel. And it was all about where to put the camera. So it's like interviews with like Scorsese and different people about this topic. And that's what it was about, was like you go back to the intention and the story and the scene and basically say, what's right for this, what's right for the emotion, and what's helpful for the viewer. So the job that you and I just worked on, I was tempted at one point in time to do some flashy things with the camera. And then talking with the agency about it, they were also like, yeah, I feel like this is a story where we just want to settle into the moment with this dad and like kind of go through the paces with him. And so that was a helpful guiding point for me at that point to go, okay, we don't have locations yet, but I do have an idea of what I think needs to happen from a camera standpoint that is right for the story, but that's also going to give this a style and give this a sense of cohesiveness. And then to me, it's about the collaborator process, right? Like chatting with Julia, who shot this way in advance, talking through the shot list with her, pulling locations and then showing her those locations and talking about what we could do with the camera in those locations. So yeah, it's an evolving process of that for sure.
I love it. I think, I mean, I could ask you 101 questions, but anything else you want to add? If not, we'll open it up.
I would add one thing at the end. Hey, another beautiful. I think what it is that because I built this in not Canva.
Keynote, then to Canva.
Yeah.
Classic.
But otherwise, there's the lovely Brandon Hirsch's face underneath that, who is a Nashville native or local. But in terms of finding balance, you talked about burnout. Like Ryan Camp and I were just talking about burnout a little bit ago. I think that's the other side of this, right? Is I'm fully aware that the idea of like pushing yourself, excellence, mastery could very much fall into like hustle culture and like you're never doing enough. You could always prep more in every single job. So on some level, I think you do have to be mindful of yourself and like where you're at. I think it's easy for me or not easy, but I think one of the helpful things as a director is that everything ebbs and flows because I'm not on a staff position. I'm not showing up 9 to 5. I think that's its own unique challenge to bring that level of consistency in that. But for me, because it goes job to job, the nature is when you get on a job, it's all consuming. Mm-hmm. And because it's happening in such a short amount of time that at that point in time, you kind of have no choice but to give yourself over and go, well, if I'm going to make this great, it's a sprint. I can do that for 3 weeks and I can survive that, or I can do that for 4 weeks or whatever it is. The same is true on the flip side of that. When you come off that job, you need to respect the fact that you need to recover and that you need to like gather yourself. And I think if you try and obviously string too much of that together, you will burn out. And then for me, the other side is if I am going on to a big stint of like back-to-back jobs, it does come down to being able to have that laser focus and remember this is a sprint, and also what is it that makes me excited about this? Because if I lose that, then it is really hard to show up every single day and give like a really great amount of effort to something. So that's kind of like 101. And if that's a mindfulness thing for you every day or whatever it is to like set your intention and set your focus, I know that's been really helpful for me when I go into what's going to be some crazy hours.
I love it. Anybody have some questions for Matt? Oh, here we go.
I'm curious, on the passion project you showed us, you mentioned that you're doing these passion projects partially because you see that that's the type of work that you want to be doing, and so you create something in that space. I'm curious if there's an example after this one, you know, if you found that achieved the goal, if it brought you more of a specific type of work or expanded your presence with agencies, and as a follow-up question to that, if there are still currently like passion projects that you have in your head or that you're planning on doing even after having one that was hopefully successful like that?
Yeah, it's the whole like you want 1 + 1 = 2, and it never does. So no, I have not landed that big cool car job yet since that.
Hey, slowly but surely it's happening.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, right? Is like it's so easy to fall into that trap of feeling like it has to do X, Y, or Z for you to be successful. And on some level, I have to be able to look at that honestly and say, I'm proud of it. So that in and of itself had to be like success, right? Like if I'm proud of it and everyone else who is part of it is proud of it, I can't control what it's going to do out in the world. But it was cool, like, so while I haven't landed that cool car job that I'd love to do, like you and I were in LA on the same client that we were working for this week, and the client we're working with, like the marketing team, she pulled me aside. She's like, oh yeah, that piece that you did in Utah. She was like, I showed that to our marketing team. It's like, this is the kind of stuff we need to be making. I would never have known that if she hadn't told me. And it was also not at all applicable to what we were shooting.
It was very left field, but we loved it.
So I think that's the thing I have to remind myself is like, you don't always get to, it's not like 1 for 1 on how all that stuff plays out. Maybe at some point it will be. So I try and not like get caught up in that. Like ask me in 5 years. That's an honest answer to that. You know what I mean? Like
that was actually the answer I was looking for. So
yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah.
I found it to be the same kind of way where you don't necessarily know exactly what the result's going to be, but that doesn't mean you're not going to get a positive result or an expanded awareness of your work or your capabilities. Part
of it's even just figuring out yourself, right? Like the more you, like that was a big learning thing for me back in the day. I did a short film with Kirk. Hey, Kirk. And it was a super fun project, and I like wrote it with a friend, and it was like inspired by her music, and we were like, let's do a cool narrative music video, and then it turned into a narrative short. But the interesting thing I learned from that process was like, when I stepped back from it a few years later, I was like, if I had just set out to make a narrative film, I don't think I would have made that story. Like I did it because of like where it came from. So like that took some awareness for me at that point in time, the vulnerability side of it, of going, okay, who am I as a person, and like what do I want to drill down on within that? And so I've been able to like try and take that and hone that more and more with passion projects. And your follow-up question was, are there more? And the answer is yes, there's always more. And I think there has to be, like, and that was something where the learning side of things never stops. And like I got to like hang out and chat with another commercial director who's amazing, like absolutely amazing. And I was talking to him about stuff, and we talked about passion projects. And he was like, yep, it just never stops. Like even at the level that he's at, he was like, agencies still want to see if I can do something really specific. And he referenced another friend who's at that level that had just spent like an absurd amount of money on a passion project that he wants to make into a feature. So like it's easy to feel like one day you're going to arrive and that's like, oh great, this thing is going to work and I'm going to get paid to do these jobs and they're going to be huge budgets all the time. And it's like, I talk to the people that are doing that sort of stuff and they're like, no, they're still doing their passion projects because they always want something slightly different and to stretch themselves and to grow.
Well, I think it's like just a full circle back to like your intentions of why you do this. It's passion. Like you love it. So yes, it'd be great if you get your dream job from it, but that's not why you showed up to set that day, you know? So I think, love it. Anybody else have any questions? Yeah.
What called you to be a storyteller?
Ooh, I'm gonna sink in.
Going deep into the roots. I don't know, other than the fact that it was just something I always responded to as a kid. I love to read, I love to write, I love to watch movies. I would like, take action figures with my brother and make stupid movies as like a 7-year-old. So I think at some point, like I was doing enough of that to enjoy it. And then like I did the whole path of like, I'm going to shoot weddings or whatever I could get my hands on just to like learn the craft. But I will say like, when I look at a piece like that, like I thought about the idea that like making something like that is kind of like summer camp. That's a common joke, right? When you're talking like you're in a project that's like a really fun one, is it feels like summer camp in that you're around a bunch of people that are equally passionate about you and creative. So I think I would say on some level it was that, right? Is like when I started making stuff, I just had a lot of fun with it. And I think that's the whole passion thing, right? Like I've thought before, I look at the trends of the industry, like we can talk about AI, we can talk about all this stuff. And I thought like, like where's this headed? Should I consider at any point in time, like a pivot? Should I go to school, do this? And like the reality of what I keep coming back to, at least at this point in time, is like, I could make a ton of money potentially going and doing something, but if I don't feel this way, like I felt yesterday when we got to that last setup and I looked at the monitor and I was like, damn, like I want to feel that way. And right now I'm lucky enough to keep doing that and I want to do whatever it takes to keep growing that.
So watching your commercial, the little more emotional one, when it comes to like working with actors, how do you know as a director when is like a good take in the sense of not pushing them to, keep doing that exact same take? And then you said there was a little bit of a stressful moment. How do you kind of, I guess, regather, set, like say, when that one got upset, how do you kind of bring everything back to getting everyone refocused so they can perform?
When it comes to like evaluating takes, that is so interesting, right? Because it's so subjective. And I think for me, like the starting point is like, I don't generally like something that feels melodramatic or over the top. So I'm always looking for it to feel as real to me as possible, at least based on my experience. And that's where it's cool to like work in like documentary stuff or even shoot weddings, is like you see firsthand emotion all the time, right? Like you see when it's real. So I try and use that as like a baseline of like, does it move the needle for me? And then I think in terms of like working with the actors specifically, I remember the first time I worked with like a real actor. And I don't mean that in some A-list way. I mean this in that like I had been like working in small stuff and it was fun. And then I worked with this dude and he brought something different every single take. And I didn't even, like we would talk about the scene, but what he interpreted and how he did it was special. And I remember at that point in time being like, oh, I get it. This is, when you work with someone who's like truly able to bring it, that is a different skill set. So I think I'm looking for that too in the casting process. I'm looking like, when I ask you for 3 different options in your self-tapes, I'm doing that because I want to see, do you have range? And are you nailed into one idea for that role? Or are you open to the fact that that could be something totally different depending on the moment? You did have a second part of that question and about how do you kind of bring it back in amidst the craziness of set. And I do think it works well. Like, I'm pretty calm.
Very calm.
That's my vibe.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like marching and I need to get stuff done.
Oh yeah, you're not.
But yeah, so I think part of that is people will respond to your energy, and not just the actor, but like everyone around you. So we had a couple like funny situations yesterday that could have been stressful. And I think after you've done it enough, you kind of just can shrug it off a little bit and be like, yeah, that just feels like a normal weird thing that's going to pop up in any shoot day. You can only plan for so many fires, like they will present themselves. And so just like letting that roll off of you and just keep yourself fixated on remembering what the goal was.
Well, and to piggy on that too, because there's a couple times, because with the shoot that we had yesterday, this agency and client, you know, we've built a really good rapport where we've done 5 campaigns. So with that, it allows, you know, Matt, I feel like even more so to be immersed, you know, to build that rapport. Like, no one's in his face, no one's coming, but at the same time, what I think it goes back to training like an athlete, because you're always thinking edit while you're shooting. When you feel really good about a take from, you know, frame left to frame right of everything that's going on, the blocking, the time that you took for the transition, all of that, you know, the agency, again, just like casting sometimes can be like, well, you know, the inflection wasn't perfect, you know, and then Matt will come over to Video Village and you speak to it so calmly and you give every reason, but it's not just because you liked his hair, you know, it's like you're thinking edit and you give that level of assurance.
And that's a big part of it, right? As a director, on some level, your job is to instill confidence. If that's the specialty they've hired you for, not everyone's going to trust you and hand that off like by any means, but at the end of the day, if you can instill confidence throughout the process and if they can see that pay off, I do think generally the trust does start to build.
Anybody else? Oh.
Where does the inspiration come from? Like, do you have a group of trusted collaborators that you are bouncing ideas off of? Is it like transcendental meditation? When you're running, what's your personal place for ideation?
Great question. I think it's about giving myself space to like think over things and sometimes I'll have an idea that I might brain dump at one point and I might sit on it for a while and come back to it when I'm ready for it. So I think that part of that is the process for me, but it is different. Like, cause I remember there was a passion project thing I did with Gear 7 and it was one of those like fell out of the sky into my brain moments. Like I literally sat up in bed late one night and just grabbed my computer and just started writing because it was one of those rare times where I felt like I saw it and then I came back to it the next day. And, but yeah, I think for me, it's generally about trying to give myself the space to be creative. Because when you're forcing it, sometimes it just doesn't happen. But I say that in the sense of this has been a big thing for me of figuring out with the whole training like an athlete thing is like screenwriting and the like longer term vision side of things. Like any great writer will say you have to show up every single day. And you kind of got to demystify the process of inspiration and the muse. And like one day it hits you and one day it doesn't, even though there can be truth to that. Generally, it's kind of like the effort thing. If you're just going to show up every single day and like, you may write for 10 minutes and it may be absolutely terrible. Or you may like get on a wave for a couple weeks and write something. I think that has been part of it for me is that I'm tempted to at times to feel like, oh, it's got to be this like inspirational, beautiful thing that falls out of the sky. But when that stops, when that doesn't happen, if you just start getting up, I feel like every day and writing, eventually like something clicks and you're like, oh, I actually am interested in following that seed.
So is that a part of your daily regime? You know, get up and are you an early riser and then, you know, you do exercise, breakfast, writing? What's your...
I wish I was that formulaic. I'm not. I've had to like try and regiment myself a little bit more. And honestly, the weird thing is like, I think what's the biggest struggle has been as a freelance director is like you're on a job and the pace is crazy for a couple weeks. And my brain does not need to go to screenwriting when I'm in the midst of like location scouting and the things that are pertinent to that job. But the diligence side of it for me is that, yeah, I do have like a list of things that I want to do every single day and start my day with. And so like tomorrow, like I'll fly back home tonight and tomorrow morning I have to do that. Because if I don't, I've learned it will spiral, right? You'll look up and it's been a week and you're like, oh man, like why didn't I do it? there's something to be said about just showing up every single day and saying, yes, I will write today. I will open this document, and whatever comes to me, I'll do my best to write with it. If I start that on day one of being back, then generally it does start to build momentum and lead somewhere.
Okay, Micah, do we have any Zoom questions?
I
No?
forgot there's
Okay.
a Zoom.
Yes, we're
I thought
live.
that was just us.
All right, well, I think that is it.
Cool.
Thank you so much, Matt.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Nicely done.